Welcome to the Bodybuilding Banter podcast, your number one source of all things bodybuilding. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes. Now, here's your host, Leroy Rollins.
All right, people, welcome to the podcast. Something a little different. Usually it's just myself and another guest, but you guys have seen these two faces regularly on the podcast. So we're going to try to make this potentially maybe once a month kind of deal. Me and these two guys will sit down, give you guys an update on how we're doing with our training. We're all competitive natural bodybuilders, and obviously we'll be competing throughout our careers, so we can update you guys on when prep starts, how we're managing through the off season, obviously with the global situation right now, how we're kind of surviving everything. And then we're going to each kind of pick a topic when we do these kind of monthly episodes, and we're going to dive into it. Today's topic is blood flow restriction training, which with many of us training at home is a super viable option to get good work in. So that's what we're going to talk about. I know these two have a bunch of questions that were submitted and context with that, and I'm going to kind of bounce in between everything. But first and foremost, guys, how are we doing?
Doing good, man. It's actually warming up in Pittsburgh, which is nice. It's been freezing cold and getting some snow in the last week. Although you're in Canada, so
yeah, don't bitch about snow to me.
But it's April. It's not supposed to snow in April.
Yeah. It's actually nice out right now. It's like, I don't know, 10 Celsius right now. It's all right.
You got to convert that.
Yeah, I suppose. I'm talking to Americans, right? I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. I have no idea.
You're overruled 2-1 right now, too, so you got to convert.
You guys should tally how many times I say A through this episode.
We could add like a little live counter up in the top.
Yeah, an A counter. Man, if I could edit that in, that'd be sweet.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I found a beach that's finally open, so I moved to the beach last year and then got locked down and haven't been able to enjoy it really. But we finally found one that they're letting people on if you're exercising. So we're just walking on the beach.
That's how you hit the boardwalk.
Not the boardwalk, because you'll get arrested for that.
Oh, it's just like a pier sort of deal, or what?
Fishing pier that you can go on in the state park. But if you go on the boardwalk, they literally have a drone that they're like monitoring it.
See, that's where the States is nuts. We don't have that shit up here.
That's just excessive.
Yeah, it's crazy. I guess they were trying to stop people from like coming from New York City and New Jersey and everything down here, thinking it's going to be like some vacation and then overflowing all our hospitals and medical services.
Wow. Yeah. Where I went and got those photos taken like a couple weeks ago, it was like one section of the entire area that was not fenced off. Like they had 6-foot high gates and everything. It was a pain in the ass trying to get those photos, let me tell you. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So none of us are prepping right now. I think James and you weren't going to prep at all this year, correct, Dan?
No.
Yeah. So for those watching, James and I had to rejig our year, but Dan's just riding the wave with his home gym.
I'm lucky with it.
Yeah.
I'm in a lucky situation, man.
I'm up to 3,200 calories, reversing out. I was 169 yesterday, so only up, 4 or 5 pounds from the low. I don't know.
How you feeling?
I feel pretty good. Overall, like training has been really good, actually. I've found a good kind of groove now at home, I think. I'm a good setup. Food-wise, I'm this week kind of committed back to like a pretty rigid routine. I'd say the last like 2 weeks it was like 70-30. But whatever, we're fine. I'm honestly surprised I'm still sub 170. I was definitely projecting above 170 when I stepped on the scale yesterday morning, but I think the plan this year is to just hang tight between like 170 to 180 and not get up to 192 again, because that was a 40-pound cut, was probably a little aggressive, but I think we'll go into the fall like 175, 180 probably, and then do the thing again.
Are you thinking about targeting earlier shows in 21?
I'm going to do, so last year I did the Natural USA's, the IMBF show in Rochester. I'm going to do that again. They asked me to go again this year, but timeline-wise it didn't pan out. So I'm going to do that again, which will be mid-April. which will be the first one. And then I depending on what happens, it all depends on, if I get a card or not at any given show, kind of dictates what the rest of the season looks like. But then I would do the Empire State Cup again, which is what I was supposed to do this year. And then this is a pain in the ass now because my nationals qualification for Canada is only 2 years, which means this was the last year my qualification's up. So if I want to do nationals next year, I have to requalify. So then I have to find another show at some point before July. But I'll worry about that when the time comes.
You should hit the Pittsburgh show in April.
Man, I just might.
The OCB show. If it's on the timeline, man, I told you got a place to stay.
I wanted to do an OCB show. I think it'd be sweet, just because I want to do Classic down there.
OCB Classic, I think, and from what I've been seeing, is like the place to be. I really think WNBF has a lock on the bodybuilding scene right now, but the OCB guys in Classic are like really, really good. Hence why I still don't have my fucking pro card, because I keep running up against monsters. Like, I'm always like, I see something like.
You grabbed a couple second places, didn't you? I think I remember you mentioned that.
Yeah. I took third in open in my first, second in the debut to the guy who won the open, and then I took like 2 back-to-back seconds in the opens to the guys that won it, and they were just like genetic freaks. Like, cool.
Those assholes.
Which shows did you do? Did you do the Battle of the Belt? Was that one of the ones you did?
No, I did. So I was up in Syracuse for a while, so I did the NYS Natural 2 times there, and then I did the it's in West Virginia, Mountain State Classic, because I'm now down in Delaware. So it was like 3 hours across the state. I was smiling that whole time, Leroy, you were talking, because we're going to be seeing a lot of each other next year. I feel like our plans are pretty much the same, except I'm not doing a Canadian national qualifier because I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
I've got like so much family still up in New York and Rochester where like those are all the shows I'm eyeing. So this should be pretty fun. Yeah,
like for me, it's just so much easier to drive the 2 hours across the border, because I'm literally like, I don't know, 45 minutes north of the border to get across. Whereas like any INBF, WNBF shows are all out west, which is an 8-hour plane ride and not worth it. I'm actually working on getting a show here through the WNBF, which will be sweet. I would love to promote that. That's in the works, which is cool, but I wouldn't compete at it, right? So that's not in the cards. But yeah, no, I'll tentatively April, May will be time to rock again. I'm potentially looking at some different options of how to structure things, so I'm stoked. It's just now got to play the waiting game.
Yeah, see how things go with this. Go ahead.
Yeah. The only difference, you were like way ahead of me in composition already, so I'm actually still digging a little bit, which is kind of hard to do right now because mentally I don't have that same drive.
Yeah, 100%.
Stalling a bit. But like I'm at 189, 190 right now, but I am a bit taller, so like those numbers, I'm not like you can't really compare. But I wanted to get down to like 180 and then start the burst that you're doing now. Because that'll be about 10 to 15 above my stage weight, 180.
What were you? So you were on stage.
Nice striking.
What were you on stage? Like 165?
Yeah. So the lowest I got was like 160 in the first, and then the second and third shows I was like 163, 166, somewhere in there, depending on how much I carved up. But I've never been as heavy as I was in this off season, so hopefully that stage weight's a little bit higher. Obviously, don't expect like 5-10 pounds. That's just not realistic.
Yep.
But I got up to like 220, where the most I got. I was
if I was 220, I don't know if I'd fit in this screen.
It was uncomfortable.
Man, I pushed up to 195, and I was uncomfortable.
How tall are you, Dan?
I'm about 5'9".
Yeah, so I'm the short fucker in the group.
Like half an inch or like almost an inch taller than Dan, but yeah, like my last bulk, I got to like 195, and I thought I was big, and then Brett got me. He was like, "No, we're pushing it." I was like, "Oh boy."
Yeah, like
how was getting out food at that point? Awful.
It was bad. I was eating like everything in sight. Like I was buying boxes and boxes of Pop-Tarts just to hit the carbs.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where my wife like sat me down and was like, "There are healthier ways to do this. Like I know you're trying to put on weight, but like, stop. Just stop doing it."
I love it.
What's the go-to Pop-Tart flavor?
Fudge.
See, I'm a fruit guy. I always go for
Oh,
like the
fuck,
strawberry
no.
ones or something like that.
No. Actually, I had chocolate
say
chip
no.
last night. I had chocolate chip was damn good.
All right.
That one is good. I think they're all pretty good. But
Yeah, you can't. I tried cream of rice the other day. Botched that really bad.
did you lumpy or?
I just tasted like shit. I don't know. I just figured out I don't like it. I don't know how the guy it's big in the UK, right? So I see them eating it, and I'm like, that looks pretty good.
I've been eating it every day.
Like Jack Thorburn makes it look like the best thing in the world, and then I try to make it, and it's awful.
His bowls are also like a gallon-sized bowl of cream of rice.
Yeah.
With, I think he puts like 8 scoops of protein in there or something like that.
I love that guy, man. He's such a robot. It's awesome.
He's absolutely a robot. He was one of the first guys I saw when I started natural bodybuilding. That
Yeah.
photo of his where it was like a close-up of the side of his leg.
Of his calf. Yeah.
Was like separated.
Webbed.
No, it was the one. It was the separation between his hamstring and his quad, and you can see like the fibers
Yeah.
pulling apart.
It's awesome.
That's fucking gross.
Yeah.
He gets peeled.
He did. So I've like asked him about that 100 million times because I've had him on the podcast and stuff, and he said he did 16 weeks basically keto, and then it wasn't like he got like peeled, but he said like those photos are from like a pretty extensive stretch of like maintaining that condition, and he said your body just begins to adapt and like get used to it almost, and that's when the thin skin and like that webbing you were saying there, James, like. He's like, that came after the fact, but I'm like I've never seen that before, ever, anywhere, ever.
No. Should we dive into this BFR?
Yeah, let's do it. We're probably like half hour in, so let's hit it. Okay, so start with what it is. What's blood flow restriction training, and why would someone want to do that at all?
Dan, you hit that one. You do a lot more of like the practical side of things. You said you've been doing it for a while, so why don't you give us that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, from a practical standpoint, it's just an easy way to get work done without much load. It's really practical for metabolite work in general, just as a metabolite technique, but also like right now, if you don't have access to heavy weights, it's an easy way to produce an adaptation. If you're working around an injury, that sort of stuff. Yeah, I mean, you can include probably more than you think too, but that's the basic high level of how what you'd use it for.
So what would be its purpose right now? Like, why would someone want to throw that into their training?
If you're looking at numbers specifically, most of the research, like the reason that it became really big in the clinic is because post-surgical or post-injury, people can't load heavy. And we know that, for strength gains and hypertrophy gains, you want to be training somewhere around like 60% 1RM or higher. With BFR, you use anywhere from 20 to 30 is the normal percentage. So it's like way, way lower. So right now, when people can't load up their heavy squats and heavy, whatever, you can do 20% of your 1RM if you can get creative with whatever weight you do have and still get strength and hypertrophy gains going forward.
And on top of that, it's like, it sounds nice because it's like, oh, I could just load light. It is the most painful thing you will ever do in the gym. I swear to God, it's the most painful thing you'll ever do. It hurts. The pump hurts so bad. But yeah, you can use lighter loads though. So
if someone's going to do some BFR work, what's kind of the rep range? They're going to obviously go a little higher rep, right? You're not going to do BFR sets of 5.
No, you wouldn't.
No, and that's actually been proven to be worse for you. For whatever reason, I think the study was doing like a 5x5 set scheme, and they found that if you look at the numbers between a regular training group doing like 70-80% with a 5x5 versus the BFR protocols with 5x5, the data was worse for the BFR. But if you reverse it and do those 20 to 30%, obviously if you're trying to use 30% of your squats without BFR, you're not going to really get too much benefit. But throw the straps on there, and all of a sudden you get some pretty significant gains.
Nice.
And James, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the theory behind it is that the metabolite accumulation has some sort of contribution to it, correct?
Yeah. So I call it a cascade because there's 3 big theories that, at least from the research when I was doing it, but they're not mutually exclusive. Like one person poses one mechanism, but then it also interplays into the next person's mechanism. So it's not like they're very independent things. So you've got your metabolite accumulation, which is and that's I actually was looking through the research again this morning to remind myself. So when you do that, when you occlude the blood flow out, you got blood flow into the limb, blood flow out is stopped from the band. That's your venous return. It decreases the available O2 in the muscle, and then that increases type 2 fiber recruitment, and then also increases the high threshold motor units. So you're hitting motor units of the muscle that you haven't been normally, and you're working on the type 2 fibers, which we don't normally train as bodybuilders as often. So that's kind of like a new stimulus to the training too. And on top of that, though, it like causes capillary shear, meaning just like a lot of pressure into the small blood vessels, and it increases cell swelling because of the pump that we all feel when you do it, which actually upregulates. It's called VEGF, which is an angiogenesis factor, meaning it actually creates new blood cells and like capillaries and things like that. So you're creating new pathways because you're stressing distant pathways. So the body's trying to adapt and like get around this lack of oxygen, and it's creating new things because of that.
So for those that don't know, when we say metabolite work, define that.
Dan, you want to do that one?
I can't really talk on the mechanism, but basically, when I say metabolite work, it's lactic acid is the primary metabolite that I'm talking about. I believe there's others that accumulate, but
okay, so that's something that I think would pay for people listening. Like basically high rep, the shit that burns.
That's
I
the
think
stuff that just is painful and torturous and awful, like supersets, drop sets, like blood flow restriction, all that sort of stuff. Like the stuff that just hurts.
Okay, just wanted to make sure because
from a practical perspective, I can't really touch on the mechanism. Maybe James can touch a little bit more on the specific metabolites and.
I mean, so lactic acid is the byproduct. It's what accumulates, which causes that pain. It's not something itself that's causing too much. Like the VEGF, there's increases in IGF-1, which is a signaler for growth hormone. And there's actually downregulation of myostatin, which is what blocks muscle protein synthesis. If you've seen the people, like type in myostatin on Google, and you're going to see those crazy jacked cows because they have the disease where there is no myostatin. So obviously you want as little of that as possible circulating. So like VEGF-1, myostatin, and IGF-1 and VEGF are like the big three that are causing the benefits that we're seeing from blood flow restriction. But then there's also, it's not really a hormone, but satellite cells, which are these, they're stem cells that haven't differentiated, and you want to activate them because they cause more cell growth and the creation of new cells. And the BFR has actually been shown to increase upregulation of those satellite cells. So that's not just increasing blood flow and things like that. You're actually building more structure if those are active. The fun fact about those, and this is kind of like this hypothetical protocol that a mentor of mine were working on, you don't have to be using the muscle to get the effects of the BFR. Meaning, I can, if I want to hypertrophy my biceps, I can potentially, again, this is theoretical, use BFR on leg press. So I'm working the quads, hamstrings, glutes, all that. You get these systemic effects because hormones don't stay in the muscle. They circulate through the blood flow. And then you can then train your biceps. And since you already have these hormones upregulated in the body, you can potentially get a higher stimulus for growth out of a different muscle that hasn't been worked.
So you're proposing a superset of leg press and
bicep
curl.
So what you're saying is
technically, but we were using it in the clinic. Say someone has a shoulder issue or an elbow issue. I don't want to load that too much. I don't want to fatigue it too much, but I can quickly get them to hop on a leg press, do a BFR protocol for their legs, get those systemic effects, and then rehab the shoulder and potentially get better regeneration and growth in whatever damaged tissues there are.
Potential.
Really cool.
No promises though.
Yeah.
So we got BFR defined, what it is, what it does. Now let's talk volume. When how often, how much, all that good stuff. What's kind of the general recommendations for it?
Dan, I know you had posted a couple questions on my poll there specific to this. So do you want to talk about like how you've been doing it? And I can just compare to what the literature from what I've seen has shown.
Yeah, primarily I've seen protocols of 30, 4 sets usually, 30, 15, 15, 15. Whether that's the best, I don't really know. I've also done 20, 10, 10, 10. Primarily right now, I just use it when I'm running what I call metabolite mesocycles, where it's focused on metabolite work. So it's used in, I guess, limited doses. I'm not using it all the time. I think it can probably be used sporadically if you want to use it, chronically, but I mean, not like every single session. And James, we can get into this. This is kind of my question is like, and I know Dr. Mike has talked about it, about how you kind of get used to metabolite work in the sense that you just start getting really good at clearing metabolites. So using it maybe in phases or in limited doses might be more effective. That's kind of how I approach it and how I structure it into my training. But in terms of protocols, though, like I think it's probably a good idea to set specific rep targets rather than just calling it failure or using reps in reserve. Just because I mean it's so painful, it's really hard to gauge how far you are from failure. I think it's just good to maybe just have a rep target and then you just do that rep, hit that rep target and then take your 30 seconds of rest where you're just in pain still and then hit your next set and that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's kind of what I've seen. I don't know if there's been additional studies. I believe that the 30 15 15 15 protocol was at least one of the earlier tested models.
So you do a first set of 30 and then rest, same weight,
Yeah.
10 or 15 reps.
Yeah, so I assume the theory of why you start with that 30 is to really get that blood flowing, and really get that to accumulate in that first set, because the first few reps feel pretty normal, but then by the end of that first set, it's just you can feel it's just engorged with blood. So I think it is a good idea to start with a really really high rep set and that to fill everything up and then do sets from there.
So it's almost like a rest pause.
Yeah, so I think you hit the big things there. That you're right in saying the 30, 15, 15, 15 is the most researched. And I think there's been a couple studies showing that has been the best so far. Doesn't mean it's the best ever. It's just not found the better scheme yet. The other ones I've seen are 4 sets to failure, which is similar because you can imagine that first set you're going to get quite a few more reps anyway, and then not be a strict 15, 15, 15. It might be like 20, 15, 8.
Yeah.
Push the second set. And then the third was just 5 sets of 20 reps. So again, it's just a large amount of volume. I really think that the 30, 15, 15, 15 is good. Because I don't think you're going to get a consistent drop off. If you really push yourself on 2 back-to-back sets, like 30, 20, I think you're going to be so gassed where your last 2 sets are going to be almost nothing. So I think almost the 30, 15, 15, 15 gives you a bit of buffer on that second set where you're like, okay, that wasn't terrible. And then you hit those last 2 and you're struggling to get to 15. So it's just like something with the intensity there.
Yeah, and the other thing I should mention is that the rest times between that are very, very short. So typically 30 seconds is what's been done in the literature. You could probably stagger that a little bit. But in regards to kind of what James said, it might be good to think about that, especially like doing a blood flow restricted squat is going to be very different than doing a blood flow restricted bicep curl. So like on a squat, you're going to get, like James said, you're going to get gassed. Like you're going to be sucking wind. But like on a bicep curl, like your biceps are going to be like, I feel like they're on fire, but you're not winded. At least I hope not. But
depends how far in the off season you are.
Yeah.
But maybe I don't know. Maybe James, what do you think about that? Maybe there's you can kind of use a slightly different protocol depending on the movement, or
Potentially. I think you hit it there with the rest being super, super crucial. 30 to 45 seconds is what the literature shows. Most use 30 seconds because you got to think of it. The whole idea of this is to accumulate blood flow and metabolites in the area. So you don't want to rest too long because then it is going to flush some of that out and it's going to negate the effect of it. So don't think of this as like a strength training protocol where you're resting 1 to 3 minutes in between because then you've just wasted the whole benefit of it, really.
I've seen some people implement it that way too, and I'm just like, that's just that's not the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And one of the questions actually that someone posed was, is this something that we could use thinking of like myo reps and drop sets and things like that? And I would say, yeah. It changes the idea of it a little bit, but I think if you're using it with a myo rep or a cluster set scheme, I think you still get the benefits because you're not resting very long. You're pushing yourself nearly to failure on the first set, and then your reps are going to taper off somewhat after that. So I think it's pretty applicable there. Um, I think it could work pretty well.
Sweet.
yeah, I would agree with that.
So when you are, say, programming it, are you trying to progress? So say you're doing, a BFR bicep curl, you're doing 15s for 30, 15, 15. Am I trying to get 20s and then 25s and then 30s? Like what's kind of the rule of thumb with that?
Yeah.
That's the trickier part. Yes, but
But you won't.
you're so like 15 pounds, like it's so sensitive to like load jumps that yes, I think it's a good idea. I think it might be a better idea to progress reps a little bit, and I think it kind of gets into like having specific rep targets too. So maybe do like your first week, like if you're looking like at a 4-week method cycle, maybe start at 24, 15, 12, 10, something like that, and then maybe go up to 26, 15, 12, 10, 10, and then progress up to maybe up to 30 on that first set, and then, you know,
Yep.
that's kind of maybe how I would approach it. Or you could bump load if you're able to load in very small increments. I have microplates. I love my microplates. I use them all the time. I highly recommend them, but I know not everyone has them or wants to buy them. So that's kind of how I would think about it. But
Yeah. Well,
it's definitely a challenge.
If we're talking programming considerations, there is some limited research on that, but again, most of the research is for clinical purposes or like performance athletes and things like that. So it's not for bodybuilding purposes. So we're
We
making
just care about getting jacked, though.
yeah. We're making a little bit of a reach here, but I did find some. So coming back to your original point, Dan, about doing it for short periods, and I think you said Dr. Mike talked about this a little bit. I'm obviously not going to butt heads with him because he can just destroy me on any topic.
Destroy all of us, man.
There
It'd be glorious. I'd love it, though.
was one study that showed that there were greater effects if you prolong the training out past 8 weeks. So they did a study less than 8 weeks, greater than 8 weeks, and the greater than 8 weeks had benefit. I would argue that it might be worthwhile to continue this in small dosages. I'm not going to do it for multiple movements, but maybe if you're doing like an arm emphasis mesocycle, to continue it for that whole mesocycle, simply for the fact that we got to look at it as just a training factor. So we know that the longer that you train progressively overloading, you're going to get better effects for hypertrophy. And coming back to the argument of we get better at clearing, metabolites, that's only one of the factors that they're proposing. I mean, you're still getting the increase in the upregulation and the IGF-1 and all that. So we might be able to get it out better, but that stimulus is still happening. And if you look at all your other training, I mean, the first time you lift, you get crazy, crazy sore. And we've shown that the soreness doesn't really correlate with muscle growth. Why would we then see this as any different? I still think the principles that we know for hypertrophy apply to this. So even if we don't feel it as much, we're probably still getting some benefit from it by extending it out. That's at least my point of view.
So no muscle confusion.
Yeah.
Aw, man.
That's what we can conclude with that one. So yeah, that's the duration. And then there's also looking at the frequency. There was a study that showed they tested 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and then greater than 3 times a week. And they found the 3 times a week to be a pretty, the best significant difference. 2 times a week wasn't as good as 3, but then when they pushed it to like 4 and 5, they didn't get as good effects for strength and hypertrophy. So
what muscle were they training, out of curiosity?
that one I believe was just the biceps. Which is interesting because we've seen that biceps training higher frequencies is what a lot of people push, 4 to 5 times a week. But that was, again, that's just one study. It's not a meta-analysis or anything. So some of this could be flawed that I'm reporting on.
Nifty.
Yeah. So some of the other questions were about the safety. And I know that I probably have the most information on that. But Dan, have you kind of chatted with anyone, heard anything about like things to consider?
I mean, definitely how tightly you wrap, and we can get into what you use to wrap. I mean, the goal is to not make your arm go white, which I've done because I tried the first time I did it. I had knee wraps, and those are just tight for upper body. For lower body, they're great, but my fingers I started not feeling my hand, and just you want to be occluding blood that's coming back, not going to the muscle. So you want to be restricting the venous flow, not the arterial flow. So that's something to be cautious of in terms of like the overall safety. I've heard it's pretty safe from what I've seen from the research, from what I've heard from experts, but I don't know probably as much as you do on that side of things.
Yeah. Leroy, how much of this have you done? Like, have you used anything besides knee wraps or anything?
No, like I've tried different shit. Like I've tried wrapping like these things super tight and that kind of stuff, but I find it needs to be decently thick, right, to like really make it effective. But I honestly haven't done a whole lot of it. Like I've done random, like thrown it in there at the end of a workout just to feel it. I wouldn't say I've ever like actively programmed it or anything like that. It's something, obviously, with the situation we're in, I was looking into. So us doing this podcast is super convenient for me. But I wouldn't say I've ever done a whole lot of it, so I can't really give any personal feedback on it.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point there, because I think a lot of people kind of will think, oh, blood flow restriction is just some magical thing that's going to all of a sudden blow me up. Like, it's not something you have to use. It's a tool in the toolbox that can be very, very useful at times. So, like I haven't done blood flow restriction in, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months, something like that. Like it's not something I use all the time necessarily, but it's a tool that I will use periodically as appropriate.
How do you determine like how, like one of my clients asked me, like how tight do I put it? Like how do you know what's too tight?
So there are some actual numbers on that. In the clinic, it's a little different because we can use blood pressure cuffs and really like be super scientific with it. The practical approach is what the literature calls it. They used a 0 to 10 tightness scale, and they found that it was pretty reliable. If 10 is like limb is completely cut off, like throbbing, going numb, around like a 7.
Okay.
And to be on the safe side, always try and be on the lower end of that 7. So if you're thinking, oh, this could be an 8, drop it down a little bit. And that's why I tell most of the people that are using this to actually just buy BFR bands. They're like $20. All they are is like a decently wide strap with some sort of belt, like buckle mechanism, because most of them have a number system on them from like 0 to 10, which doesn't necessarily line up with that 0 to 10 scale, because that's all perceived. But you can say, all right, I got it to 7 this time.
7 feels good.
I want to try and keep it.
Yep.
Because you want it to be consistent. You don't want to, a small change in how much pressure you're giving can change the occlusion of what you're giving by a lot. And what they've shown is you want full venous occlusion, meaning there's no blood flow coming back out, and you want 70 to 80% of arterial occlusion. But you don't want to completely occlude the limb, because then that's damaging. So there is a fine line of the most effective results. So you need to find a way to be able to actually be consistent with how tight you're putting it. That's why I don't like the resistance bands and like some of these other things, because I have no idea how tight I'm technically doing it.
Mm-hmm. So
I started doing this back in, I'm thinking 2015 2015-ish. So I still use the stuff that I was using back then, which I use knee wraps for lower body and then quick release medical tourniquets for upper body. I knew that they started making like specific stuff for BFR. That stuff started kind of coming out, I don't know, maybe 2017, maybe 2016. So kind of after I had bought all this stuff, but those do sound really nice to like with this, like where you can specify the tightness, the thickness. I'm assuming on the upper body a little bit thicker than a medical tourniquet. And also, do they have different ones for legs and upper body then? Because
you can buy a wider one, and the width really is just on comfort. Because if you have a really narrow band, it's going to cut in. It's not going to feel as comfortable. But as per what literature I've seen, it doesn't necessarily affect the efficacy of the actual BFR. So just find something that's comfortable for you. But most of the leg ones I've seen are a little bit wider, for sure.
Okay.
And yeah, I think
that's pretty cool.
Like a medical tourniquet, they've just branded them and put some numbers on them and things like that. But at least you then have a system of really trying to regulate how tight you're putting it.
Yeah, the numerical system is nice because I mean I've always just kind of been like, okay, that feels about right. But yeah.
Right on.
What about placement? I think someone had asked me a question on placement. Dan, do you
want to? I did. Actually, that was kind of my question, and I know most of the studies have, and what most people have done is occluding at the top of the limb, so right underneath the delt cap on the upper body, and then right below the glute on the lower. I've seen people that have done it and occluded like at the knee, or I don't know if I've ever seen anyone occlude at the elbow. You could do. Actually, I have done BFR forearms. It's fun, but like I said, I've tried tried to train almost anything with BFR at some point, but I don't really know if that's any safer or better or. It is, yeah. I kind of assumed so because all the experts seem to be recommending the top of the limb, so I just stuck at the top of the limb. But
you got to look at it from you're trying to occlude blood flow, but you're not trying to cause any damage to underlying structures like nerves, because nerves are very sensitive, and we don't want to put too much pressure on them. So if putting it behind the knee, there's a ton of structures that run directly behind the knee. And there's no muscle body to really protect that there, or at least it's very thin. So the reason they're putting it at the insertion of the deltoid and the quad, it's because that's a pretty meaty area where you're not, you can compress pretty evenly without actually pinching down on any structures. So I would say in the elbow crease and behind the knee, definitely do not do. If you wanted to do it with forearms, I feel like you could probably get away if you moved it down onto some of like the muscle bellies themselves. But just be smart about where you're putting them. There's a reason why people put them where they do.
So if I'm doing calves, I'll still go, at my quad.
I still would, because you got it's a flow effect. So the blood's still, capped wherever that band is.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be directly on that muscle itself.
And the other thing is like I've done blood flow restricted glute work and also delt work and occluded in the same area. So even though it's the muscle that I'm training is above, it still seems to have some sort of effect. So James, could you kind of touch on like the why that is? And that was kind of my follow-up question is there seems to be certain muscles that you can occlude and then others that you can't.
Yeah, so this is something that Berto actually talks about a lot. Alberto Nunez, for the people that don't follow him and should. He's a big proponent of this, but he talks about it for glute training a lot. And me and him had a discussion about this a while ago, probably about a year ago. His theory, and I think it's actually backed by the science a little bit because there are a few studies that look at this. His theory is that if you're occluding, we'll say the quadriceps and the hamstrings, doing a split squat, which is one of his favorites, you're fatiguing those muscles so much that the glute then has a higher proportion of strain placed on it because it's nice and fresh. So that's why you're getting a proximal effect, meaning effect higher than where the band is. So he uses a lot for that. And there have been some studies that look at the proximal effect. For strength, which I know we're not huge into, They occluded at the delt, and they were doing a bench press, and they found strength at the chest gains, like 8.6% increase in strength in a bench press when using the band. Now, you could say that that's because they're hypertrophying the triceps, which is an accessory muscle, but there was some sort of benefit there approximately. And then looking specifically at hypertrophy, there was one study that looked at the bench press again, because it's a pretty easy movement to regulate, and they found a 3.8% increase in delt size. However, they said in that study it didn't reach the point where they said that that was a significant difference compared to the control, but there was some sort of trend of an increase. So maybe with more research it would show that. And again, I think it's because you're fatiguing those muscles downstream, and the other muscles then have to kind of take over.
See, I guess my question is it only a mechanism of fatigue? Because like I've done actually BFR bench press, and it seems like I get a lot of accumulation in my front delts and in my triceps, but not really in my chest. And I've done blood flow restricted hip thrusts, and it's just awful, like awfully painful. But like I've tried blood flow restricted like a row, but all of it just seems to accumulate in the biceps. You don't really get much of a accumulation in the back. And I guess that's my question. Does it have to do with the direction of blood flow, or like it seems like there's kind of a cutoff, but it's not where you would think. I don't know.
I think this debate gets a little bro sciencey just because it's a hard thing to really study, and most of the studies haven't looked at it yet.
Yeah.
But if you come back to that kind of systemic hormonal upregulation that we talked about as a method, then we could see how this could be effective. You're training the back with a row. Yes, you're not occluding the back, but we know that the increase in growth hormone and all those other things are going throughout the system as soon as you release those tourniquets or whatever you're using. So then you've now introduced that to a muscle that's been fatigued from a movement. So potentially increasing muscle protein synthesis there.
Nifty.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
So it's got some use then, I guess.
Yeah.
Regardless of if we're under quarantine or not, there is still some benefit from using it, right?
Yeah. Now, I wouldn't say to do whole protocols of this being the only thing you use. Most people that use it advocate still you need to train heavy, and you need to work through multiple rep ranges and all that. Like all the principles that we've talked about still apply as a training protocol. This is what Dan said, just another tool, to add in.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good way to look at it. Quickly,
kind of running down muscle group and exercise selection. I think obviously for biceps, really any kind of curl. Triceps, is there any certain movements that you guys think would be more effective than others?
Dan, you want to go ahead?
I don't know, maybe not more effective than others. I mean, you can include almost any movement. I mean, you can do, I think like a push down, like a Alberto Nunez again. His style of push down where you kick your arm behind you to extend the shoulder further is a good one. That just seems to accumulate a lot of blood in there. But I mean, overhead tricep extension, you could do that. You could do close grip bench. Yeah. But
cool.
I have a slightly different approach to it than a lot, because if I'm using BFR, I almost always try and use a machine. So like a machine preacher curl or a machine tricep extension where you're up on the pad there. And that's only because it's so fatiguing that I don't want to have to worry about stabilizing anything. I want to be able to really focus on pushing through the reps, and I want to lock in everything else. So it's really just focusing on that one movement pattern. But that's just a preference of mine. It doesn't mean that it's any less effective to do any other ones.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually a really good point, because like when I've done blood flow restricted bicep curls, like a normal dumbbell bicep curl, I find I tend to shrug it more, like especially towards the end. Like there's definitely a tendency to kind of use auxiliary stuff, stabilizers, all that sort of stuff. That's kind of a different thing, stabilizers, auxiliary muscles. But I think that's a good idea to be locked into a position where you have to have to use whatever you're looking to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Any closing thoughts? We're like 45, 50 minutes in. Any last words?
Yeah, this was a long one. I just had there was one more
I like
question.
it.
Yeah, there was one more question that was posed to me, and I don't want to skip over it. I think we covered all the rest of them really well. I think this will probably be a pretty quick one because the answer is we're not sure. But the question was about nutritional considerations when using BFR. If there should be any alterations on days where you train them. I know some people have, they do higher calories on training days, lower calories on non-training days. This question was, should we increase protein on days that we are using BFR training? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I don't think you
I
do
don't
really
know.
anything. Yeah, I don't think you do anything crazy different. It's just a different training modality, right? Like you're just
Yeah.
creating a different stimulus, a different form of muscle damage, regardless of how you do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That'd be my opinion on it.
Might be a good idea to have some carbs intra.
Yeah.
Maybe particularly beneficial. I don't know. Like just to replenish glycogen and. But
Yeah.
other than that, yeah, I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah,
Really.
and I'm not a dietitian or anything there, but I think the thought was if you're increasing the potential for muscle damage by doing this, should you have more protein to kind of negate any catabolic effects? I wouldn't think so. And some of the literature has shown that the recovery from BFR is actually way better than heavy training. I think like one study showed 2 hours post, the fatigue ratings and like torque and everything like that could be produced by the muscle was back to their baseline. So we're not actually creating that much long-lasting damage to the muscle where you would actually need to supplement with anything else to negate that, in my opinion.
Cool. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, dudes. This was good.
Yeah. This was a lengthy one. I can't act like I know any other topic as well as this one. So
hopefully all the viewers got some enjoyment out of it. Both these guys' social medias will be linked down below, so you guys can give them a follow. And if you want to see more of this kind of stuff from the three of us, be sure to let at least one of us know, and we'll make it happen. Submit any questions or topics, and if you want to hear us three chat about this kind of stuff more often, then we'll make it happen. So thanks for watching, guys. You too. Appreciate it.
See ya. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
All right. We'll see everybody in the next podcast.